All right, the final thing we're going to cover today is grouping. So grouping actually comes from database programming. So if you've had any sort of database programming on SQL, or maybe you've used Microsoft Access at some point, you should be pretty familiar with grouping. But many of you probably won't be familiar with grouping. And so grouping is a way to take a table and group some of the rows or records together that share certain features. So, each row of a data table typically is unique. You have some sort of data that you're storing in that table, and each row is typically different in some way. But for some of the columns, they might share data. They might have the exact same value of a specific column. So an example of this is, let's say we have a group of a record of airport flights. So let's say we work for Delta, and we have a large table that lists all of the flights that are going to fly from a specific airport. So, if we were writing this out, we would have probably something like the flight number. We would have some sort of information like inbound airport or origin airport, destination airport. We would have something like type of plane, number of passengers. And we also might have something like the delay, the departure delay. So we also might want to keep track of, did this flight leave on time, or was there some sort of delay for it? And so this, for example, could be useful in order to figure out how many of the passengers are probably going to miss their flight. And so you have this large data frame, and you want to analyze it, and at some point you also might want to group these things together. So I might ask you, is there any airport where it's more likely to have a delay than others? So is LaGuardia, which is an airport in New York, equally likely to have a delay as Austin, Texas? And so how do you go about doing that? So we have this table that lists every single flight that took off, and one of the things you could do is just filter the origin airport, and then do some sort of for loop in order to do that. So that is possible, but a much quicker way to do things is using this idea called grouping. So you take this table that originally has a large number of rows, and then you group the rows together that have the same value in a particular column, or perhaps columns. And so, if we do this, we have this origin airport, and the idea is that we take all of the records that share the same airport. So in this case, it would be the first, the second, the fifth, and the eighth record that all have airport 1, and we group those together, and that's what those arrows indicate. For airport 2, there's 3 different records that match that. So there's the third, 6th, and the 7th, and then there's airport 3, there's a single record, the 5th airport. So then we can take this and we can average these numbers together, and we can see, okay, airport 3 has the longest delay, airport 2 has the second, and airport 1 has the shortest level of delays. So let's see how we do this using some of the data that we saw before. So I've reread in the world demographics.csv, which we use to predict the IFR for COVID-19. And so again, this table has 20,000 rows and 6 columns. So this includes things like the name of the country, this unique ID called country code, level information, the continent that it belongs to, and then the age of the individuals, and then the number of alive that are at that age. So, one of the questions I might ask you is, which country has the largest population? And so how do we do that? And so this is an example of where group by is a great way to approach this problem, because right now we need the total number of people alive in a country, and that does not that does not exist currently within that table. And in order to determine, for example, how many people live in Afghanistan, we could first filter it. And then, for example, we could do the sum function right here, and then we could say, okay, the number alive. So, we just use the techniques that we already have in order to figure out what is the population of Afghanistan. So we could, for example, loop through the table in order to do that. But what's a lot quicker is to use this technique called grouping. So each data frame, so if we look at a data frame, try that again. It has this attribute called group by. And so grouping is an attribute. Sorry, there's so many things, it's kind of hard to find. So each data frame has this method called group by that allows you to group records together. So you run the method, and then what you have to send it is the name of the column that you want to use to group things together. So we want to use population ID because we want all of the records that have the same population ID to be grouped together. And so we send it the name of that column. Okay, and so now we have this group by object. So it hasn't done anything yet to this data, but it has gone through that first process of organizing the data and determining which ones belong to each group. So it's a record 1 belongs to group 1, record 2 belongs to group 1, et cetera, et cetera. And so now we can use those summary statistics that we saw before in order to analyze this data. So for population, what we want to do is sum. So what we can do is we can take this group by object, and now we run sum on it. And what we find is that every single column that has a number in it has been summed together. So for example, if we add all the ages together, we get 5,050. So this is a pretty useless set of information right here. Continent code, this is pretty useless as well because adding the continent code doesn't really help. Same with the country code. But this column, it makes a lot of sense to add up. And so now we've been able to find that same number as before. So, we found the population of Afghanistan before doing that. And so that number and that number are exactly the same. But not only do we have the population of Afghanistan, now we have the population of every single country within that table. So group by is kind of like a shorthand way to do what we just did, and instead of looping through everything, what we did is we used that group by to kind of accomplish that same thing. And we can use any of those, summary things that we saw before. So if we wanted the average, we can do that. And if we wanted the min, etc. So all those things kind of work. So let's also see, so right now, this is kind of crude what we're doing because we're taking the minimum of every single column. Let's say we wanted to specify which columns that we wanted to do, and we wanted to give different summary statistics for each column. So how can we do that? So this is where we want to use something like ag. So this tells us how we want to aggregate the data together. And so now what we can send in is a dictionary. So the way this works is that it takes in a dictionary. And so it just needs the name of the column as the key. And then you have to send it what sort of function you want to run on it. So we're saying take the number alive and sum that all together. And so now the only data that is returned is the number of alive. And so now we've got the total population of each country, kind of in that way. And then if we wanted to do something different in some other column, we can continue to do that by just adding elements to the dictionary. So if I wanted to take the age, and then I wanted to take the min, I can do it like this. And as long as my syntax is right. So now I got the minimum age of this. So now we'll notice that the summary function that was applied to this column is different than this one right here. So ag is a really cool way to kind of customize what sort of summary function you run on each one. So, eventually we're going to make our way to Numpy. And so Numpy has a bunch of more complicated aggregation functions that you can also, for example, send in to do this. So Numpy, import Numpy as Numpy, but you can also send in Numpy functions if we wanted to change the exact function that we wanted to run on this data. So just remember that, what goes in here is this could be a function that you create, so you could customize your own function if you wanted to. You can take functions from other modules, or you can use built-in functions in order to kind of specify what you want to do. So, so let's save this, country data equals this. And so now if you wanted to get the population of a specific country, you can access this just like you are hopefully getting super used to right now, using the loc. And so now we have the population of Zambia. All right, so that is the basics of grouping and how you can group rows together and then perform summary statistics in order to get information. All right, that's it for this lecture.